There was once a young man whom we will call Caleb, who was obsessed with gathering possessions and gaining status. He was so driven by the desire to succeed that from an early age he managed to become one of the most prominent, respected, and influential figures in the city. Yet, Caleb was not happy. He worked very long hours, slept very little, rarely saw his family, and often became irritable at the slightest problem. His father had started out the same way and on the same course of success himself, but had embraced eventually a different kind of life, a life marked by simplicity, fellowship, compassion, and prayer. Caleb could see that his father had peace and was loved by all. Caleb also longed for such a life, but he just couldn't give up his compulsive drive for success and the recognition that came with it. And so his father, out of love and concern for his son, and worry and anxiety, would criticize him for the life he was choosing every time they would be together. He would drop one of those, just those little barbs that we parents can do so well. He was relentless with his criticism and his yearning for Caleb to find the way he knew would be most fulfilling for him. But Caleb just could not find that way. One day, a voice from heaven interrupted him, saying, "Caleb is also my son, and I love him just the way he is." I love him just the way he is. Caleb's father wept as he began to realize that in trying to help his son all these years, he had actually been hurting him through his disapproval and criticism. So immediately he ran to his son and he said, "Please, Caleb, never feel that you have to change what you do or who you are. I love you without limit and condition, just as you are." After that day, the father began simply to take an active interest in his son's life as it was. Rather than criticizing his son or worrying about his lifestyle, he allowed himself to be curious about what his son was doing and how his son's work was progressing. And in the process, he found himself seeing his son as he never saw him before, and admiring him for his gifts and expertise, and loving him more deeply. Ironically, soon Caleb found that he was no longer so interested in working the long hours and began to spend more time with his family and to be less concerned about what others thought about him. Eventually, Caleb realized it was only after his father had accepted and loved him unconditionally for who he was in all of his mixture of frailties that he was able to change and become that person he always, in his heart of hearts, wanted to be. The young radical Northern Irish theologian who tells this story, which I have paraphrased shamelessly for you, and if he ever sees this video, Pete, I'm sorry, says that, quote, "This is nothing less than a description of grace. It is in experiencing the license of grace rather than the legalism of prohibition that real transformation can become possible." I love that term, the license of grace, rather than the legalism of prohibition. What if grace made us licentious, open, wild, unleashed people in love. The license of grace, rather than the legalism of prohibition, means liberation from the oppressive tyranny of shame and self-hatred that sometimes in the church we can deal out like that father. Deal out unwittingly in the name of love, and yet shame is the fruit. It means release from captivity in the prisons of perfectionism, so that finally we can be experimental with life, try things on for size, dare to make mistakes and learn from them, fail and find in the very failures themselves open doors to new and creative vistas. This past summer in England, the famous American preacher Barbara Brown Taylor told us how she chose to live on a farm in a very rural and a very conservative part of Tennessee. Grant. Now, I'm about as liberal as you can get, Ms. Taylor told us. But when I go to the little country store in town, there are anti-Obama signs on all the walls, questions about his citizenship, where he's really from, Obama with an Arab keffiyeh on his head. But she said, I'm always greeted warmly and kindly. And I know that if I am ever in trouble, these good people will be there for me with an outpouring of care and love like I have never experienced before. I also know that in the midst of our differences, I love them deeply. This is not what a friend of mine once said, that love that she's talking about. A friend of mine once said tongue-in-cheek to me, I love you, Win. I have to. I'm a Christian. Rather, Barbara Brown Taylor has found that God is present in the very act of love itself, as Peter Rollins puts it. God is present in the very act of love itself. We discover the divine in the very act of love itself. And I will add, not in the act of judgment, not in the act of criticism, but in the act of love. And this act of love, every act of love, is a manifestation of the Spirit, as the Apostle Paul proclaimed. So when Kevin Kwan took time from his organ practice, getting ready for his first Sunday here, to engage Tracy and Ken in conversation when they walked in from the Stockley Gardens Arts Festival last year, that was the Spirit of God at work. When Bev Rayner, my wife had a discussion about this, whether it was Bev Rayner or Patty Bosman. I'm going to give both of them credit. A few weeks ago, with Scott helping him through the prayer book, when he decided to try just one more church to find a home. That act of love was the Spirit of God at work. When the Caring for Creation group decided to work tirelessly on a yard sale to raise money for wells in Haiti, and also found that their community of love and passion that drew them together deepened, there was the Spirit of God in work and in the community of love. When David and Leon decided to honor us by having their love for each other blessed in this church and invited the entire community of Christ in St. Luke's to the ceremony, 2:00 next Saturday afternoon. Because they love us, and we love them, and they want to include us in their love for each other. There is the Spirit of God. There is nothing more Trinitarian than that. And whenever we dare to take an interest in someone rather than be put off by them, and they are seen as they are and valued as they are, there is the Spirit of God. St. Luke is the evangelist of the Spirit, both in Jesus and in the fellowship we call the church. St. Luke is our patron saint. That means that we especially engage our Christianity within the perspective of Luke's understanding of the gospel. Patrons make it possible for us to do what we need to do, and Luke's gospel of spirit and love makes it possible for us to know how deeply valued we are by God and how healing that love is for all of us. It is love that draws me here and love that keeps me here. And in the final analysis, I wonder whether that isn't what draws you here and keeps you here as well. Amen.